So what are call options? In this video, I'm going to explain them as simply as I can so you can begin to understand them and use them in trading. On this channel, you will learn the steps it takes to make a full-time income trading in the stock market. So if you're new here, consider subscribing. And today, we're talking about call options. So there are two things that you can do with shares. You can either buy them or sell them. It goes the same with calls. You can either buy calls or sell calls. Now, if you think a stock is going to go up, normally you would buy shares. Now with options and calls, you buy a call if you think the stock is going to go up. So think of buying a call like buying shares. If the stock goes up, both buying shares or buying a call make money. As the stock goes up, the value of your calls or the value of your shares that you bought go up as well. Now on the flip side, if you think a stock is going to go down, you can sell. So either you sell calls or sell shares. And these make money as the stock goes down. And so if you think a stock is going to go down, think of it as selling a call, just like selling shares. And then if you think a stock is going to go up, you buy a call just like you're buying shares. Now, this is a really good way of keeping track of what buying and selling calls do. If you want to buy a call, you want the stock to go up. And if you want to sell a call, you want the stock to go down. So to get a little more complicated, options are contracts. And what these contracts do is they control the right to buy and sell shares. Now, if you buy a call option, you are buying the right to buy shares at a certain price. And so what this call option does is it controls 100 shares and it has an expiration date just like any other contract would. And then you are controlling them at that certain price. And so essentially, when you buy a call, you are buying the right to purchase 100 shares at a certain price by a certain date. So if a stock is trading at 100 and I buy 100 call with 30 days expiration, that call option gives me the right to buy those 100 shares of that stock at $100 over the next 30 days. So if this stock goes up to $200, I still can buy it at $100 over those next 30 days with this call option. And I can use this call option whenever I want over those 30 days. I don't have to wait until the end of those 30 days to use it. So here's a bit more of a concrete example of what call options are and kind of how you use them. Let's say Jill owns an apartment complex, which is currently valued at $1 million. Now, there are a few things that can happen that can change the value of this apartment complex. Either a community center can get built, which would increase the value of her apartment complex, or a factory can get built, which would decrease the value of her apartment complex. Now, Ben here comes along wanting to buy her apartment complex, but let's just say he needs some time to get a loan from the bank, and that's going to take like 20 days, and he doesn't want anyone else to buy the apartment complex in that time because he really wants this apartment. Now, what he does here is he buys essentially a call from Jill. And what he says is, I'll give you $10,000, which is the option premium, or essentially what it costs to pay Jill for the right of that contract, because Jill wants some money to give Ben that right, because she could just sell it right away to someone else for the same price. So she's going to want some return for holding the apartment complex for Ben. And then Ben says, if you don't sell this within 1 month, which would be that expiration date of the option. So essentially Ben's wanting to buy a call from Jill for a month for her not to sell the apartment complex, and it's going to cost him $10,000. And so then Jill sells him the call saying, I will sell you the option to buy this apartment complex for $1 million, which is the strike price or the price that he is allowed to buy it at for any time within the next month until the option expiration date for $10,000. So then Ben gives Jill $10,000 and he gets that agreement or call option in return. So to sum it up is Ben would be buying a call, Jill would be selling a call, and The call option would essentially be the apartment complex with a strike price of $1 million. And then the option premium on that call would be $10,000. And then the option expiration date, as they decided, would be 1 month. Now there are those two scenarios that can happen during this month that Ben is waiting for his money. Now let's say the scenario number 1 happens and the community center decides to get built and increases the value of the apartment complex to 1.1 million. Now Ben already has that contract to buy it at $1 million. So when he gets that money, he could buy the apartment complex at $1 million instead of the actual value of $1.1 million. So right away, he would have profited money from purchasing that apartment complex at a lower value. And then on the flip side, if the factory decided to get built, decreasing the value of the apartment complex, Ben probably wouldn't decide to exercise his option to buy it at $1 million because the value of the apartment complex is now $900,000. And if he chose to buy it at $1 million, he would be overpaying. So instead of using his call option, he could then just say, well, I'd rather buy it for the face value and not use this contract that we signed. Now, neither of those scenarios could happen and the value could remain the same at $1 million. And Ben could still use that call option to buy it at $1 million, but he wouldn't be making any extra money by buying it at a cheaper value or losing any money. In the scenario where the community center went up in value and Ben had to pay $100,000 less than market value, he could have decided to flip that right away for $90,000 profit. Because he did have to pay that $10,000 to Jill in the beginning, he would only profit $90,000 from that $100,000 sale. But to show you the leverage that options give you, he essentially made $90,000 from $10,000 in the end. So he was able to leverage an $1 million asset with only $10,000. And that is why options are so powerful, is because they give you control over a large amount of money for very cheap. When you buy a call option, you are gaining control over 100 shares. And usually you are paying a fraction of the price of what those shares cost, but you're still getting the movement value of those shares. So if a stock goes up $1 and you have 100 shares, you still gain $100 from that. But you may have only paid $100 for that call option. So in the end, you would be doubling your money, which is very hard when buying actual shares. But with buying options, it is very easy to do. Now in this scenario, Ben was buying a call, but Jill was also selling a call. So even though she may have lost out on some profit as the community center got built, she still gained $10,000 that she wasn't going to get before. So she was able to sell the apartment complex for $1 million, which she wanted to already, and then get another $10,000 on top of that. And then in the scenario where the factory got built, she did lose money with the apartment complex going down, but she still got that $10,000 extra from that call option, which made the loss less for her. And then of course in the scenario where nothing happened, she just made another extra $10,000 on that $1 million sale. And so for Jill, selling that call option in 2 out of the 3 scenarios was a very good decision. And even in the first scenario where she technically lost out on some money, she still made more than she planned to before, and there was no way for her to know that the community center was going to get built. So instead of gambling and hoping, she did the safe bet of taking the $10,000 that was more guaranteed. So let's talk about a more concrete example. Here we have a stock trading at $100, and we think that it's going to go up to $110 over the next 30 days. So we are going to buy a $105 call for $1 per share. And so normally with options is they give you a per share value, and because an option controls 100 shares, it's going to be times 100 for the price. So quite often you will see a call option costing $1, and usually that means $100 because it's $1 times 100. So for this example, this call is going to cost us $1, which will equate to $100 in the end to buy the whole call option. And then we will have that call for 30 days. So once the stock gets to $110, we can exercise that option and buy the shares at $105. So how we calculate the profit for this is it'll be 110 minus 105, because that's the difference between the current value of the stock and the strike price of our stock. And so that'll equal 5. And then we want to minus 1 because that's the cost per share of our call option. And so that means that we will make $4 per share or $400 using this call option. And so what this shows us is that our break even point on this trade is actually above that 105. It's actually at 106. So to break even on this trade and start to become profitable, the stock has to go above 106. And so this is why buying calls still can be tricky. It's not just a really safe bet. The stock still has to go above that price that you want to buy it at to break even, because you still have to pay money for that right. Now, if the stock never rises above that $105 or that strike price, we won't want to use our call option because we'll be overpaying for the stock at that point. So at that point, we'll just let it expire worthless and we'll be out the $100 we paid for. But our hope here was that we risked $100 to try and make $400. So with those odds, quite often, a lot of the time we might lose. So with options, you can actually buy at whatever strike price you want. So with that last example of the stock trading at $100, I bought a 105 strike price call when you could have bought a $100 call or even a $90 call. But with how options are priced, there's an upward sloping graph of how these options are priced, with prices that are higher than the current value of the stock being cheap and prices lower than the current value being expensive. And so an example of this would be if we wanted to buy a call option with a strike price at 90 and the stock is currently trading at 100, that would be very expensive. And to show you how this is calculated, we need to dive into how buying that call option works. So if we wanted to buy a call option at 90, that's currently below the value of the stock. And so we could turn around and exercise that call option right away to buy shares at 90 when the current value is at 100. So who in their right mind would sell you that without already taking that into account? And so a simplified version of how to calculate this would be, we would take the current value of the stock trading at 100 and then minus that strike price we want to buy at, so 90. And then so that would give us 10. And so the difference between the current value and the strike price is 10. And then we would times that 10 by 100 because an option always controls 100 shares, and that would make 1,000. And so this essentially calculates the exercise value, or if we use that option right away value, and how much money we would make. And so again, that's if we use that call option and bought shares at 90 and sold them at 100, we would be making $1,000. So someone that wants to sell us that call option or the value of this call option has to take into account that $1,000. And so these types of options are called in the money, or ITM. And this is for any strike price that is below the current value of the stock. So any option with the strike price below 100 would be called an in the money option. And then that makes anything above it an out of the money option. And these options are very cheap. And then in the middle, you have at the money options because it is at the current trading value of the stock. Now, these out of the money options still cost money because you are still paying for that time value of the option. So if you're buying a call option for that $110 strike price, it's not going to have that value of the in the money option, but it's still going to have some cost to it because you're paying for that time value. Just like when Ben bought that call option on the apartment complex, he still had to pay $10,000 because he's still buying that contract with that 30 days. And so whoever's selling him that contract is going to want some compensation for giving him the ability to do that. A quick example of what the prices on these options might look like is an out of the money option will be very cheap, trading at $150. And then an at the money will be about $350. It'll usually be more than the out of money options. And then the in the money value will cost even more. Now to get even more complicated on you, there are two different values for pricing options. And so those are called extrinsic value and intrinsic value. That intrinsic value is that $1,000 that we talked about. So with this $90 strike price in the money, the intrinsic value on that would be that $1,000 that we calculated. That value of, if we exercise this option right now, how much would we be able to make? So if we exercise this option at 90 and we were able to sell it for 100, we would be making that $1,000. That would be intrinsic value. Now, extrinsic value is essentially the premium that the seller wants to sell you that option. With someone selling you this contract, they're going to want some kind of compensation or potential profit to sell you this contract. As you can see with this graph, as the in the money goes up, the intrinsic value goes higher and higher, and the extrinsic value gets lower and lower. And then also as something goes out of the money more and more, the extrinsic value actually goes down as well. Now the at the money options have the highest extrinsic value because they have the highest chance from going with no intrinsic value to gaining intrinsic value. And that's really what makes options profitable, is when they begin to gain intrinsic value and essentially real value with the option. Now to show you what this actually looks like on a trading platform, we're going to look at an options chain. And what an options chain is where you see the price of all the different options that you can buy for a certain stock. Now, I remember this being pretty overwhelming at the beginning when I just first saw these numbers. And so I'll try and walk you through it as easily as I can. Now, when I took this picture, Apple was trading at 174.80. And so that is how we're going to be able to calculate or look at these options. So walking through this options chain, we have, this is the call section of the options chain. And then we can see here with these columns, we have the intrinsic value, the extrinsic value, and then essentially the price of what those are trading at. And then over here on the right, we have the expiration, which will be that date of expiration. And so these expired the 20th of April for 2018. And for this examples, let's just say that's about 30 days out. And then on the right over here, you can see the different strike prices. Going back to those basics of, with Apple trading at 174, these prices right here, lower than 174, will be the in the money strike price. And so they will be valued higher. And then right here will be at the money. And then here will be out of the money. And so over here, I tried to make this so that graph we were looking at before kind of helps with this being the out of money. And then, you know, right here being in the money, and then, or at the money, sorry. And then here being in the money. And then we can see as we go further into the money here, we can see that the intrinsic value goes up and the extrinsic value will be the highest with at the money. So starting with the out of the money options, you can see that with Apple trading at about 175, if we wanted to buy 180 strike calls, those would be 22 cents or 21 or $22. And so those out of the money options are really cheap compared to as you go in the money, they get a lot more expensive. And we can see here with the intrinsic value, there is zero intrinsic value because again, these are out of the money options. They don't have that exercise value or the intrinsic value. And so these out of the money options, all you're paying for is that extrinsic value of 21. And so you'll see here that the bid and the ask are at 20 and 22. And so if you even those out, you'll probably be able to trade at 21, which will be the extrinsic value of 21. And you can see as we go closer to at the money, or where this black changes to purple, that's where the extrinsic value is the highest. Even looking at the in the money options here, you can see that the value still increases as you go closer to at the money. And then over here on the left with the intrinsic value, as you hit at the money right here and start to go further into the money, the intrinsic value starts to go up pretty rapidly, making these options over here cost a lot more. You can see that they start to cost $300, $800, $1,000. So the in the money options become a lot more expensive. Now you may wonder why there's a bid and ask price. Well, like any other market, these options do have a current value based on the intrinsic and extrinsic values, but they will still go for whatever people pay for them. So people will still try and maybe get cheaper or greater than what the market is valued at, but most of the time you will still get filled at the actual value of that option. Now with options, because they're a contract with a certain time on that contract, based on how long that contract is, you're gonna have to pay more or less. So if a contract is only for 7 days, you're gonna have to pay maybe $100, where you're gonna have to pay less than if the contract was, let's say, 30 days. And this goes into calculating the price of options. So options that have less time on them are gonna be much cheaper than options that have a lot more time on them, because the probability of the stock going in your favor over a longer period of time is greater. And so the people selling those options are going to want more compensation for that. So here on this options chain, you can see all the different expiration dates there are. And so in that highlighted box, those are the days till the expiration. So the ones with 0 are going to be very cheap, and the ones with 217 days left are going to be a lot more expensive. And in options, this time decay is called theta decay. An easy way to remember this is T for time, T for theta. And all this does is theta decay is a number that shows you how much money the option loses every day. So for an example, if you have a 30-day option, the theta might be $5. And so if you had a $100 option, that option would lose $5 every day. Now, as you see with this graph, theta decay isn't linear. Theta decay goes faster and faster as it gets closer and closer to expiration. So if you buy an option with 120 days out, the theta decay or time decay is going to be a lot slower than if you buy an option with 30 days or less. And so that is something to keep in mind when buying options, just because the closer expiration options are cheaper, like 10 days out or 7 days out, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easier to have a more profitable trade. Giving yourself more time of 30 to 50 days or 60 days, depending on what you're doing, might be a better way to go, because your option won't be losing value as time goes on. Now, the big reason why this theta decay is so important and knowing when it's fast and slow is quite often when you're actually buying or trading with options, you don't actually buy an option with a plan to exercise it and purchase those 100 shares. Quite often you want to just buy the option and then sell it back for more. And so that's why this time decay is so important, because you're not necessarily wanting to wait to the last minute to sell your option back, because it'll be losing value faster and faster as you get closer to the expiration. Theta is just one of a group of variables that help you calculate options called Greeks. And I will have videos on all of those. And I will also have videos that take a deeper dive into calls and also puts. So if you have any questions on anything I went over in this video, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments below.